Joining me now to follow it up, we have Kristy Greenberg, former federal prosecutor and former deputy chief of the criminal division at SDNY, now an MSNBC legal analyst, and Susanne Craig, New York Times investigative reporter, both of whom were in court this week. Welcome to you both. Kristy, Trump's lawyers tried Friday to poke some holes into Pecker's testimony. What do you think jurors took away from this week?
I don't think the defense was successful. Really, Trump is charged here with falsifying business records in order to conceal an agreement with others to unlawfully influence the election. And so what you heard from David Pecker was about that agreement that Donald Trump, David Pecker, and Michael Cohen had to unlawfully influence the election. And they talked about, he testified about this August 2015 meeting where they anticipated that women may come forward and have damaging stories about Trump that could hurt the campaign. David Pecker testified that he was going to be the eyes and ears of the campaign and that he was going to alert Michael Cohen and the campaign about anything that would be damaging so that they could make sure those stories didn't see the light of day. And what was really significant were the conversations Pecker testified to directly with Donald Trump, both before the election and after the election. Before the election, he testified about talking to him about the story, trying to kill the story with Karen McDougal. And then after the election, he testified about conversations where Donald Trump thanked him for making sure those damaging stories did not see the light of day. The defense tried to act as though this was all business as usual, but that really backfired because it wasn't business as usual. The magazine is going to make money from publishing stories, not from killing stories. And so that really fell flat. And I felt like Pecker was a very good witness for the state.
Susanne, Trump's former assistant, Rona Rona, she didn't say much, but she did share a fascinating detail about the differences in how contact information for Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels were listed. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So Rona Graf is an interesting person in Trump's world. She was his assistant for decades, and she wasn't on the stand for very long yesterday, but she did testify to some interesting things. And there was two names that she testified that she entered into his contact database. One was Karen McDougal's, and you had her first and her last name, her email. I think there was a phone number there. It was put up actually on a screen for the court to see. And then the other information was Stephanie Clifford, but it didn't say Stephanie Clifford. All it had was Stormy and then a cell phone number. And it was interesting because I think part of the reason that Rona Graf was brought in to testify was to establish potentially for the defense that the relationship between Donald Trump and Stormy Daniels could have been about Stormy Daniels wanting to become a contestant on the Celebrity Apprentice, that she wanted something from him because she came to Trump Tower in 2007. She's written about it in her book called Full Disclosure. They had a meeting, and the allegation that was left by the defense for the jury was that she was there angling to get a slot. It wouldn't be his job, but a slot, a celebrity spot on that show, Celebrity Apprentice.
Interesting. So, Kristy, you have Todd Blanch, who explained somewhat awkwardly to the jury why he still calls Trump president. But prosecutors have been objecting to his use of that title. Why is that?
Well, it's confusing at times because he's referring to him as President Trump during time periods when he was not president. A lot of the lead up that we've been hearing about in David Pecker's testimony was before the election. So it is confusing to refer to Donald Trump as the president during a time when he wasn't. So it's just confusing for the jurors. But ultimately, I think that the defense is doing this really for two reasons. First is to placate Donald Trump. His lawyers in the civil fraud trial also referred to him as President Trump, even though there was no jury there. And they did the same thing in their court filings. So I think the second point is to try to really drive home the point to the jury that he is not just any criminal defendant. He is the former president. And so he is somebody who is different and should be treated differently by them. And they should consider that when they deliberate. So I think it's for those two reasons, to placate him as well as to drive that point home to the jury.
And Susanne, David Pecker talked about when he visited Trump Tower on January 6, 2017, and James Comey and others were there. And he said that Trump introduced him as the owner and publisher of the National Enquirer and then added, Pecker probably knows more than anybody else in the room. It was a joke, apparently. Pecker said, unfortunately, they didn't laugh. But Trump got a chuckle out of that?
He did. It was quite a moment when that testimony was given in court, just to imagine that the head of the FBI and those other senior people were there, and that the head of the National Enquirer is brought into Trump Tower, and he was brought up. Jared Kushner actually brought him up to the office. He was going to talk to Donald Trump, and after that introduction, there was a side conversation, we believe, out of earshot of those people, including James Comey, where Donald Trump again asks David Pecker about our girl and how is she doing, and they have another conversation about that, the relationship that Donald Trump had with Karen McDougal, and is she talking, and it's still just at the front of his mind, even at that period of time, that this information could come out.
Excuse me, Christy. Pecker asked Trump one question on different occasions at Trump Tower, again at the White House. How is Karen doing? I mean, I know from our notes when Pecker spoke about Stormy Daniels, Trump was closing his eyes, moved his head from side to side. How did he react during testimony about McDougal? And why was he asking Pecker about her?
So I think at that point, Trump was asking the questions because there had been some amendments to the agreement. After the election, there had been an amendment to the agreement to allow Karen McDougal to speak to the press. And when Donald Trump found, and that is very significant, because again, it drives home the point. What was the purpose of this agreement? It was so that she would not speak to the press prior to the election. There was a campaign purpose here. The fact that she could speak after the election and that they made that deal just shows that it had nothing to do with really any other purpose. But the fact that she was then able to speak to the press, Donald Trump, when he learns about that amendment, was annoyed by it. Pecker testified he was very upset and said, well, what are you doing here? We're losing control of this. And so I think when Donald Trump was following up later, how is she doing? And Pecker's testifying she's quiet. It's, yeah, everything's fine. She's still under the contract. She's still getting promotional opportunities. She's happy. Don't worry.
So also Thursday, after Pecker's full day of damaging evidence, Trump had this reaction in the hallway. Let's take a watch. Oh, I'm so sorry, guys, that we don't have that at the moment. We do have it now. Let's roll it.
Today was breathtaking. This room, you saw what went on. It was breathtaking and amazing testimony. This is a trial that should have never happened. This is a case that should have never been filed. And it was really an incredible day. Open your eyes.
Challenging question here for you, Susanne. You're able to add any context to breathtaking, amazing, and incredible?
Wow. And just in terms of the testimony that happened?
Yeah. I mean, he's saying it was, but he's not interpreting it in the way that a lot of people would be interpreting it in terms of damaging to him, right? I mean, he's just trying to downplay how much this was.
I think that's what they were trying to do. I mean, I think the testimony was all of those things, but I don't think reflected very well on him. And I have to say, it's worth repeating that David Pecker was an incredible witness. He was steady Eddie. He answered every question. And it's interesting, for a guy who makes a living pretty much either strong-arming people and writing horrible things about people or making up stories, as we learned this week in court, he came across as very credible.
Okay, Christy and Susanne, I'd like you to hang on, please, because we're going to talk about a key moment with David Pecker on the stand and the question that got everyone's attention. So